Welcome back to our look at post-World War II theories. And now we're going to continue our look with these neo-Marxist theories when we talk about the ideas of John Logan and Harvey Mollick. And their ideas centered around the concept that cities are growth machines. And by growth machines, they mean that a city, its sole purpose is to grow, to expand, grow its population, grow its revenue, grow its appeal to outside investment. And that these growth machines are supported by a growth coalition. So ask yourselves for a minute, who are the people that would promote capitalist investment in a city? And we're thinking again about politics, economics, media. So their growth coalitions were made up of mayors, right? The symbol of the city, the spokesperson for the city. Media, right? How does media portray a place? As a place that's great to invest, or is it somewhere that we want to shy away from? You'll probably recall Grady Clay's comments that a city, it becomes what we call it, right? So the way that media portrays the city and the opportunities, developers, investors, bankers, realtors, right? They're all going to look to capture the momentum, the energy in a city and to make it grow, to support that growth. When we talk about growth, we put that into context, we're talking about political and economic strength. So think about some of your more enticing, exciting cities, the places that attract people, places where it's a fortune to find an apartment or a house, right? Those ideas that growth, that economic strength is developed through these growth coalitions, as the city's sole purpose is to grow and expand. When we look at some examples of this, we look at Under Armour and its plan to recreate South Baltimore. This plan has been in the works for a number of years, and they have already received over $1 billion in tax breaks and direct investment. The idea that what's good for Under Armour is good for Baltimore. So you can see again where a city, any city, that has to address social concerns like education, housing, infrastructure. A lot of times they bypass those needs of the residents to attract investment, to grow the local economy. And again, that's what Baltimore did as it ponied up about 2/3 of that 1 billion to make way for this new campus in South Baltimore. Getting back to Castell's ideas that the state is an agent of capitalism, right? You can see that directly here with Logan and Mollick's idea, where our state, our government is investing taxpayer dollars into these types of ventures. Again, this is a critical way of looking at this. Another way of looking at it would be that we're looking at tens of thousands of jobs, growing our local housing market, growing our local tax base. So there's two ways to look at this. And again, we're looking at this through the neo-Marxist lens. A couple of years ago in September 2017, Amazon HQ2 started what some called their beauty pageant, where they had over 200 cities across the United States bid for their number 2 location, or what they call their HQ2, their second headquarters. Cities were going to have to put up billions of dollars for this. And again, this is where that growth coalition comes into play, where the mayor, right, along with some local economic development agents from the public and private sector, put forth a plan to host HQ2. And the payoff would be 50,000 high-paying jobs with an average salary of over $100,000. Here's a map of some of the finalists for HQ2. Again, we see some cities that certainly have momentum, right? Some major hubs. We look at places like Washington, which is a political center. We look at places like New York, which is a financial center. And in the end, it wasn't a surprise that these two were picked for HQ2 to split the headquarters. Now, New York later ran into some issues as some people fighting through this lens of Logan and Mollick said that your exchange value is exploiting the use value. We're pushing out people to put in this Amazon HQ2. We're destroying neighborhoods to bring in this investment. So some of the countering actions against Amazon HQ2 reflect the ideas of Logan and Malik. So what they said is that residents often lose in this in growth, and we could see that with Under Armour, we could see that with HQ2, we could see that with really any massive subsidized development. Think about when a stadium is subsidized by tax dollars, right? A public sports franchise or sports franchises that are worth upwards of $1 billion or more. They get taxpayer dollars to build their arenas where those tax dollars could have gone elsewhere. Again, this highlights their ideas of use value versus exchange value, in that exchange can exploit use. Use value is the benefit that somebody gets, that residents get from actually using that space. Exchange value is the commodification or the monetary value of that space on the open market. So again, exchange can often exploit and exceed use, where the residents are going to lose. Their neighborhood could be changed. The investment that's really needed, again, for things like schools goes into other areas of investment. And a lot of times our growth coalitions will actually commodify sense of place. And we see that with different developments, that maybe a tourist space that creates an artificial sense of place. One of the tools we'll come back to later this term is eminent domain, and that's a tool of the growth coalition. So governments have the ability to actually seize property and provide the owner, the property owner, what's deemed a fair market value to take their property. Now, in the early 2000s, we had some laws that limited the extent of eminent domain, that the government can't just come in and seize it. But eminent domain is still a tool used by growth coalitions to take property from somebody, pay them what is deemed a fair market value, and then recreate that space for greater financial gain. Definitely an area of concern when we examine how, again, the state is an agent of capitalism. So the other examples of Logan and Malik's theories in play. 2014, the Olympics were in Rio de Janeiro, and there was coincided a couple of years apart from the World Cup. And what we had in this part of the world was gentrification in the favelas. The favelas are the informal, impoverished and working class neighborhoods that are found outside the city. During these international events, we saw outside investors come in, buy up blocks. The government seized property through eminent domain and transform those spaces into areas that could generate and attract a lot of investment and revenue. During the World Cup in South Africa in 2010, there was townships, areas that are primarily black and brown in South Africa, areas that reflect decades of segregation and discrimination. These minority communities were demolished. The people were physically displaced from these areas so that South Africa could invest in stadiums to host the World Cup. Closer to home, the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, we saw where 30,000 people, primarily African American residents, were displaced as the city and the Olympic Committee came in, leveled a neighborhood, and created parking lots for 9,000 cars. Again, 30,000 people were displaced. That highlights a strong use value for 9,000 parking spots, which reflects that exchange value. And another example, in 2012 in London, and this is an ongoing issue with displacement in London, it's called social cleansing, an idea tied closely to gentrification, where an outside force comes in, invests a lot of money, displaces local people, and makes that place more attractive for more affluent individuals and businesses. So these post-World War II theories, again, they look at this tension right? They look at this economic system that favors one group over another. A lot of things they do is a sound way to explain these ideas, but not always. This image from London, taken around 2012, shows some of the local community sentiment towards this physical displacement, the um, the movement of people out of their communities in favor of uh, the Olympic Games coming in and outside investors. Obviously, not a favorable view. So when we look at our neo-Marxist views, again, it's important to understand our context and goals. The context here is a time of social change, right? And it's a way of looking at change in our cities through an economic lens that examines both winners and losers. The goals of it are are to make people aware of these systems, right? The ideas of Marx going back to the 1800s is that, as we become class conscious, as we understand the stratification in society, we can then work towards change. So by understanding those who are exploited in this system, we can work towards change. We ask ourselves if these are sound theories. Well, they do explain what's happening in cities through an economic sense, where it's capitalism, right? Whether we are highly critical of it, whether we're in favor of it, there are winners and losers. And our social theorists, our sociologists, our geographers, they use that lens to look to limit exploitation by growing awareness. But these are missing. These are missing elements of what's happening in our cities, just like Park and Burgess were missing elements, just like Simmel and Tonis were missing elements. Um, they don't look at the positives of these economic developments. They look at this as a primarily negative change. They don't look at community and neighborhoods that are thriving in our cities, right? They look at change through an economic sense and who wins and who loses. So while neo-Marxists do help explain a lot of our structures in place, they don't examine community. They don't fully look at the positives that are happening on the ground. Yeah, there are winners and losers, but a lot of times the net gain exceeds the loss, right? So while change sometimes isn't welcome, the long-term benefits for the majority outweigh the loss for the minority, and not looking at minority as far as racial and ethnic, but actual population numbers. So it is a way of explaining phenomena in cities, but it's not the only way, and it does leave out. So as we talk about our theorists, we need to understand that there's no one theorist that explains everything spot on, right? That's why they're theories, they're not facts. If we took a census, we could apply facts. So this is just a way, again, another lens of explaining change. And this lens is rooted in social revolts and looking and critically examining academia, society, business, what's happening. And with that, we'll wrap up our look at the neo-Marxists in the post-World War II era.